Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be going over how to plan for your profile essay. And that's going to include some things like requesting interviews and thanking people for their time, all sorts of good stuff about how to get ready for this type of essay. Okay, so first of all, we need to know what a profile is. And essentially, these are just written portraits about a person, place, or even a thing. They're usually entertaining and they're presented in a pretty casual tone. They definitely do show the significance of the subject at hand. So, depending on what you're profiling and for what purpose, you're going to be kind of looking at things a little bit differently, right? Um, However, generally, they do have some key features that are similar. So, some of those are an interesting subject. You'll need to include background information as needed. You should also have an interesting angle. So that's your approach to whatever it is that you're profiling. Generally, there is a first-hand account, and then we want engaging details so we keep our readers' attention. So if you think back to the sample profile that we have in our textbook that we've read, that one was all about plastic straws, right? So you can look at things like how does the author employ these different key features in that discussion of plastic straws? Well, he chooses a subject that's interesting, even controversial at times, right? With plastic straws being banned in some places and whatnot. We do have some background information that's given, so we know sort of why some people have a problem with plastic straws and why they're becoming problematic. The interesting angle is his own take on it, right? So, is he for or against the banning of straws? Does he find them problematic? And we know all of those things by reading the profile. And then he does include those things like engaging details. So in this case, that might look like facts and statistics and things that sort of shock us about something that seems so innocent, like just a straw. So that's one example of, a particular type of profile. But remember that for your assignment, you're actually looking at a successful person. So your key features are going to be there, but the way that you do those things and the way that you come at the subject and whatnot are going to be kind of different, right? So in this case, we're looking at a profile of success. So you're going to be entering an ongoing conversation about what defines success, and you're contributing by adding your own perspective as you present that profile of a successful person in your life. And again, remember that we want to bring our own understanding of success to this conversation. So, for instance, we watched this New York Times op doc, and that was about this herb exer Vic invades. And it's not necessarily your standard approach or your standard definition of success, right? However, as we saw and we talked about these things, um, it looks like he is successful at a variety of different things, but this is just sort of a new take on what it means to be successful, or an interesting way of adding to that conversation rather than maybe going with more traditional types of success, right? So keep that in mind when you're choosing your topic. People can be successful in all kinds of ways. So you should choose something that, you happen to have seen in someone in your life that's successful. And don't be afraid to, add something new and different to this conversation of what it means to be successful. So, when we're preparing to write a profile essay, there are some things that we need to consider, right? We want to choose our subject, first of all. But in doing that, you need to make sure that you understand the assignment and that you have access to this person. So, for this assignment, you do need to have an interview. So, it should be somebody that you at least know or know of. It can be somebody in your personal life or your professional life. But you're writing about someone who is successful, so you should choose someone that, fits that definition for you. You should also make sure that you're interested in this person's success, but probably not so knowledgeable that you already know everything that there is to know about them. Remember to consider your rhetorical situation. So it's important to think of who you're writing for, what your purpose is, and then those things sort of help define how you're presenting your subject, what format you're using, and all of those important, decisions that you make as a writer. Some resources to help you with that are listed here. So a writer's reference has a couple of good sections there that will help with this stuff particularly, and same with our Norton book. So if you're needing a little bit of extra, help and support there, start there. And then, of course, you can always ask your group, ask a tutor, ask myself, ask in class, and we can always talk more about that. So once you've sort of understood the assignment and your general parameters, then it's time to start kind of narrowing things down. So you should start brainstorming your ideas. To do that for this essay, I would recommend just choosing a few people that you find successful, and then use a brainstorming technique that works for you, right? So you can free write, you can talk over your ideas. You can list or make bubble charts, or however you feel comfortable brainstorming. If you're still kind of not sure which way you want to go, or even if you just want to try something different, there are lots of brainstorming resources in our textbooks, so you can check out all of these here. You can also look back to previous lectures on planning other essays and then use some of those same brainstorming techniques if they worked for you. So also maybe think back to your own work with brainstorming. So like what strategies are working well for you? You might want to start with a familiar one, or you might decide that you want to try just something new and different. Sometimes that helps you to sort of think outside the box. So once you have chosen a couple of people that you may want to interview, so after the brainstorming phase, then you should be at a place where you've got some ideas about people that you might want to interview. And I would definitely say keep those ideas open, because not everyone's going to have time to request an interview within your time frame, right? So when you're preparing, go ahead and choose at least a couple of people that you have in mind. When you're preparing for the interview, some things that you need to do, you should request an interview, um, you know, somewhat formally. So you'll need to write an email or something like that, asking somebody if they have time for an interview. You should write your interview questions ahead of time. Plan for your interview, so make time in your schedule and accommodate the schedule of the person who you are interviewing. And then once you complete the interview, you do want to make sure that you follow up and thank that person for giving you their time. And we've got some great resources for planning, interviewing, and thanking people for their time. All of those are important sort of business skills, right? So make sure that you are doing all of those things. And for extra help, all of these sections in the textbook will help you. So remember when you're planning your interview that you do need time to schedule, complete, and write about it. So starting sooner rather than later is definitely a good idea. You can also look at the interview that's in our sample student essay, and notice, anything that you thought was interesting or a cool approach, and definitely borrow those same kinds of ideas. That student essay also has a list of sample questions, and there is a document in our modules that gives you some samples of what it looks like to request an interview, and follow up and think and all of those good things. So those are there for you as well. So while you're waiting to hear back about whether or not the person that you've asked has time to grant you an interview, you can start working on the essay even before you have that interview. So one of the things that you'll need to do is to sort of choose your angle. So how are you going to approach the subject in your essay? So the assignment guidelines are going to take care of some of that for you, because you do need to make sure that you're looking at somebody in terms of how they are successful or why they are successful. But other than that, it's up to you sort of how you want to approach this subject. So some things to think about might be, how can I keep my readers engaged? What kinds of language am I going to be using here? What kind of tone will I have, right? So, choose your angle and sort of make the essay your own. You can look at, for example, these two pictures and see that they kind of approach success, and they give us a picture of what it means to be successful from two different angles, right? Because this one is very much all about like teamwork, and we're working together to get places. And it also seems kind of peaceful and serene, in my opinion, right? Whereas this one maybe looks at the struggles of trying to get somewhere on your own, right? He's got these steps that are kind of crumbling. He's really rushing and kind of trying to get there on his own, but racing against time, it seems, right? So that's just one example of, even in a photo, how we can see these different approaches to success. So choosing an angle matters because it helps keep our readers engaged, right? So once you have chosen your angle, you've done your interview, then you can start organizing that information. So ideally, when you have your interview, you should have lots of information at your disposal, right? I asked for about 10 interview questions, so hopefully that gives you plenty to work with. I would also recommend either writing down all of those details, or if your interviewee is okay with it, you could even record the interview, just, an audio clip, or if it's a video chat that you're doing, then that would work as well. That way you can kind of go back to it. But once all that part is done, then you come to this section in the writing process where you need to get that sort of organized, right? So you're going to go from all of these ideas and thoughts sort of jumbled everywhere to trying to make some sense of them. So you might want to decide which details you're going to include. So which details from the interview do you think are going to help you communicate this person's success most effectively? You can also decide how you're going to organize your profile. So which method of organizing is going to help you best communicate that success to your audience in a way that we can follow, in a way that we're interested in. And then there's some resources here for helping you with those things. And they talk about, how to go about organizing all of this information into a cohesive, plan for when you're starting to write. Um, and remember that we have done this kind of stuff before, right? So once you've gathered your research, which methods do you use to move from those jumbled ideas to more organized plans? And keep in mind that you have done this for all of your other essays, and so you can kind of borrow those same strategies for moving from lots of ideas everywhere to an organized plan of how to get from ideas to that first draft. So now that you're here, it's time to start drafting. So remember, shitty first drafts are still perfectly fine, right? We just want to get all of our ideas out onto paper or onto the computer screen. And then we're going to start that process again of drafting, revising, and repeating. So once you have those ideas all on paper, then it's time to revisit them, reorganize them, take things out, put things in, and work with, myself, peers, tutors as you go. Resources for drafting, these are all things you've read before, but they're there for you to revisit again. And then remember that writing is a process, right? So even though we're in our second semester and you're probably feeling a lot more comfortable with these things, it's still important that you plan on doing these things and really embrace that whole process of writing, that we're going to be going from drafting to revising to fixing things up, and then, back again, right? Because that's just sort of what we do. We're embracing it. Okay, so quick recap, writing a profile. Number one, identify your audience, purpose, and those genre conventions. So things like, how do we write a profile? What kinds of language are typically used? What kinds of tools do we need? And in this case, that might be things like a little bit of professional writing because you're writing to request an interview, and that kind of thing. Then choose your subject. In this case, that needs to be a successful person. Brainstorm your ideas to get an idea of where to start. Then start all of that planning. Don't forget to plan, request, and complete your interview, and always follow up with a thank you email. Then review that information that you've gathered and choose an angle, choose an approach. How are you going to present all of this to your readers in a way that makes sense, keeps us engaged, and fits those genre conventions? And then decide what to include and start that drafting process. And then we will be doing the actual process of getting feedback, revising, and repeating. As always, if you have any questions for me, feel free to let me know. I'm available on the Remind app, in my office hours, during class, via email. So you've got lots of ways to reach me. Also rely on your groups, and or a tutor.